People have asked me what it's like in retirement, and the answer is all good. And I will tell you this. If I had been asked to do the message on someone's voicemail maybe a year ago or more, reflecting what was sometimes my mood, you would have gotten a message that said, this is so-and-so's phone, what do you want? That will no longer be the case, but since we are talking about a family event, Jim has volunteered, so you're going to get a twofer. It'll be a message from Jim and me, and it will be much more welcoming. As I listened, because I, to be honest, did not know a great deal about Keshet, I've had some connections, including Betty Morningstar, who's been a friend through her family for about 45 years, 50 years. Some of you may know that Betty's brother is currently our ambassador in Azerbaijan because of the enormous confidence that Secretary Clinton had in his ability to deal with a minefield, almost literally a minefield. But as I listened, was reminded of someone who I now realize was kind of a member of Keshet before there was a Keshet. Appropriately enough, my mother. In 1987, I told the Boston Globe that if they asked me if I was gay, I would tell them the truth. I have always followed the honest politician's actual practice. You tell the truth and nothing but the truth. The whole truth, sometimes yes, sometimes no, but the truth and nothing but the truth. It is a corollary to my advice to a politician: if you want to stay out of trouble, and particularly if you want to avoid the worst label that can be put upon a politician, I think, is that of a hypocrite, someone who makes rules for others and doesn't live by them. It is probably impossible, given all the laws that we have that go from speeding to jaywalking to whatever, it's probably impossible for any human being to obey all the laws. But I do think if you are an elected official, you should obey all of the laws that you voted for. If you can do that, you will be in very good shape. But when I acknowledged being gay in 1987, my mother was then a leader of the movement for fair treatment for older people in America, the Massachusetts Association for Older Americans here in Massachusetts. And I had not realized it, but it was obvious. When I came out, I outed her as the mother of a gay son. And I was struck by her telling me of the number of women in particular, her peers. My mother was 75 in 1987 when I keep saying coming out. You know, LGBT people do not discuss our sexuality any more than straight people do. The difference is that when we do it, it's called coming out. When straight people do it, it's called talking. But she found herself hailed, sometimes asked to speak privately, to women roughly in her generation, some younger, who said to her, "Oh, Mrs. Frank, I was so happy when your son said that he was gay," and when she, as a supportive mother, basically said, and I pretty much, I'm not sure it was the exact words all the time, but her attitude was pretty clear when she was asked, what about her son being gay? And the response was, no. She was thanked by so many of these people, mostly women, because she had done this without embarrassment, without shame. And women told her, because she was a very respected figure in the state at the time, when she called Bill Bolger, then President of the Senate, he took the call. They told her that in some cases, their husbands had been very troubled and somewhat hostile when a son or daughter acknowledged being gay or lesbian. And in many cases, her example had been a powerful one, and she talked very much for them. I'm very proud that she later became one of the leading figures of PFLAG, an organization that does so much by enlisting parents in a broad and inclusive way to do this. So yes, that is a very important role to play, and I am pleased that you do this. I also thank Martin for the introduction. He and I knew each other years ago when he lived here, and I appreciated his mentioning something I've tried very hard to do, which is to be open about being gay, which I have been for nearly 26 years now, and to integrate that with the rest of my life. And I think that is the challenge that I see for Keshet, and it is very important to have an organization that is supportive within the Jewish community, but also important to be a force within the broader community. It is important to be inclusive of the LGBT segment within the Jewish community, but also to make sure that we are part of a broader coalition. And I say that in part because obviously the gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender children of people who are touched by Keshet are very lucky. But there are, unfortunately, many people who aren't so lucky. And I would hope, and I assume this is the case, that Keshet joins its mission of this individual support for parents with a participation in the broader coalition of organizations that reach out to help those in particular who don't have that kind of support. As I said, as I read this, I'm a great supporter of PFLAG. It has been very important. And I would hope that there would be some connection and some working together, because it is a natural fit. And both sides are important. There is a tendency for some people to look only at the political and ignore the personal, and some to look only at the personal and ignore the political. And we need both. We need an inclusion of both. I will give you an example in my own case. Martin mentioned the hate crimes bill. When we were passing the hate crimes bill, we'd been pushing for it for a long time, but to get any legislation protecting LGBT people enacted, it required that we have a Democratic House, President, and Senate. To some, that may sound partisan. To me, it's simply a statement of fact. It's just the way it is. And we finally achieved that in 2009, but before that, when we were pushing for it, some people trying to stop it, particularly in the African-American community, said, oh, don't pass that bill, because if you say it's a hate crime, if you include gay and lesbian people and transgender people in the hate crimes, then we won't be able to preach against homosexuality. By the way, the Congressional Black Caucus has been one of the demographic groups in the U.S. House completely supportive of our rights. It does turn out that being discriminated against in one sense can make you more sensitive of others. I think that's part of the reason why the Jewish community has been so much in the forefront of the fight against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. But I had to address this issue of whether or not, if we passed the amendment including LGBT people and hate crimes, that would impinge on people's right to preach against homosexuality. And I said to the Democratic caucus, let me be very clear. We are not criminalizing speech. We couldn't under our Constitution. We don't want to. What the hate crimes bill simply does is add a penalty component if an act that is otherwise a violent crime is motivated by the prejudice because of the broader implications of that. And I said, let me give you an example. I was at that time chairman of the Financial Services Committee. If this bill becomes law tomorrow, it will still be entirely legal to call me a fag. I just wouldn't recommend it if you were in the banking business. But I thank you for what you do, and the personal is very important. And I urge you to multiply those efforts by making sure that we are participants as Jews who understand from our own experience the pain of unfair discrimination and the terrible things it can lead to, and that we join in this broader effort. And I would say, for example, if you are counseling a parent of a gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender child, obviously fully including your child in all family events, expressing your love, all those are very important. But I don't understand how it could be considered consistent with your love for that child to then vote for a public official who would deny her her basic rights. And that's the kind of, in the military, I think they call that a force multiplier. You keep that going. So I'm very pleased to be here with other Jews who are committed to fighting against discrimination, and proud that Jewish leaders and Jewish organizations, Jewish members of Congress, have been leaders in the broader fight, and to thank Keshet for what you have done on the individual and personal level. And as I said, I saw that, and it dawned on my mother that this was a role that I had put her into, of being the peer and the mentor for a whole lot of other people from a broad range of backgrounds. It's a very important role, and it is a foundation, I believe, for the kind of broader political support. We are on the verge of winning this fight against the prejudice. But I do read some military history, and one of the things I note is that a mistake that is attributed to generals is to ease up at the moment of victory. The fact that we are on the verge of breaking the legal back of this terrible prejudice, and personally, because as the generations go, fewer and fewer people have any use for the prejudice. But it is still the case that a majority of Americans live in jurisdictions where they cannot marry. None of us, including Jim and I, have federal rights yet, although I think there are good chances that we win that in the Supreme Court. There are a majority of states in which it is still legal to fire someone because he or she is gay or lesbian. So this fight is not over. We are doing well, but that's the time to turn up the heat. So my thanks to Keshet and the founders and the participants for what you do. And let me be very clear, and I was struck, Jim and I noticed the quote from Hillel, "Do not separate yourselves from the community." Yes, do not allow the gay and lesbian members of our community, our Jewish community, to be separated, but let us not, as the Jewish community, in any way separate ourselves from this broader effort to end this terrible prejudice. And frankly, I see great similarities, sociologically, between the fight against LGBT prejudice and the fight against anti-Semitism. 60 years ago, this was still a place of great anti-Semitism, this country, and it was beaten. And in both cases, what you had were proud people fighting back and a reality that defeated prejudice, people whose reality rebutted the prejudice. It is very appropriate for the Jewish community to play an important role in this, and very important that we work within our own community to protect people against the prejudice. Equally important that we make sure that we are part of this broader coalition that makes it safe for everybody. The children of parents who understand, but also the children of parents who don't, and of people who would otherwise be bereft. And it's appropriate for Hillel. They always get it wrong. If I'm only for me, and if I'm only, you all know it, and I get it wrong. But that's what we need. Yes, we need to be for ourselves and our children, but we cannot only be for ourselves and our children. We have to join with others. So it is in that spirit that I am delighted to accept the award.